Hello, Year 7. Okay, in front of us, we've got an image there, and I would like you to have a go at answering the three questions that you can see on the board. So what can you see? Just write down exactly what you can see. List what you can see. Don't have guesses, just describe what you can see. That's it. Then I want you to write down what you think it's showing, and then finally, what questions would you want to ask me? So pause this slide. Spend no more than 2 minutes doing that, please. Pause this slide after 3 seconds. 3, 2, 1, go. Okay, so in terms of what you can see, you might have said things like you can see numbers. There are numbers next to white lines on the image. You might have said that you can see an X-ray, that it looks a bit like a pelvis or hips. You might have said that inside the circular shape, you can see what looks like a handprint. You might have said that you can see a spine. You might have said that some of the lines, or one of them, actually looks like it's broken. So it's kind of split in two, where you've got the number, I think it might be number 13. What do you think it's showing? I don't know what you might have said for this. You might have said somebody's had a car accident and they've had their body pinned back together. You might have said somebody swallowed something. I'm not quite sure what other things you would have come up with. You might even have thought it was an animal. It could be an animal. You might have had some suggestions about what the white lines are, so that you might have said things like they might be needles or they might be pins. And questions, well, you were probably asking, is it human? Is it male? Is it female? Is it to try and is it linked to last lesson when we learnt about China's one-child policy, and so on and so forth. There is a story behind it, and here is the story. It's a very sad story. Doctors in China discovered 23 sewing needles embedded in the body of a 37-year-old woman. There's the woman there. You can see her in the picture. The needles were discovered when Lu Chifin, that's her name, went to the doctors complaining of blood in her urine, so blood in her wee. Doctors think the needles were inserted into Lu Chifin by her grandparents when she was a baby, as they were upset she was not a boy. If you're wondering how they would have got into her head, to her body, they think that they actually pushed them through the squashy bit on the top of the head. When you're born, when you're a new baby, your skull hasn't closed up yet, and so you've got skin covering a gap. They think that they inserted them through that skin, through the gap. It's called the fontanelle. To remove the sewing needles will require several complicated operations. First, they're going to do for free, and that will remove 6 of the needles, and it's going to cost 11,000. But Lu Chifin is from a very poor rural area. That's a countryside area in China. And she will be required to find the money to fund the other operations. So you see, 11,000 to remove 6, but she's got 23 needles in her. So she's got to find a lot of money in order to have the other needles removed. There's a picture of the surgeons working on her, trying to remove some of the needles. And all the people in the background are obviously filming it because this made the news all over the world. How somebody could have been mistreated so badly and had needles pushed into their body when they were a baby shocked the world. So, our question today is linked to China's one-child policy. We're going to look at the problems of the policy and the successes of it. And what I want us to understand is that there's a preference for boys in China. I've already told you the grandparents were pushing those needles into her body when she was a baby because they were hoping that the needles would kill her and it would look like she had died from natural causes, so therefore they wouldn't be thrown in jail. And you might be thinking, well, why didn't they want their baby girl? No, they didn't want a baby girl because baby girls are not as preferred as baby boys. So we're going to learn today why it is that boys are preferred. Now, what I don't want you to do is go away thinking that all Chinese people hate girls, because that is not true at all. Many Chinese people, the majority of Chinese people that have baby girls, absolutely love them. They love them and they adore them, just like you would if you had a baby girl. But there are some that are very, very, very disappointed if their baby is a girl. And they don't want it. They wanted the baby to be a boy. So there is a definite preference for boys, and that's what we're going to be learning about today. So in front of you, There are lots of statements again, a little bit like last lesson. And we've got 3 tasks here. 1, I want you to find the statements that say why boys are preferred and answer that question using the statements. 2, what are the other negatives of the policy? There are other things that were not good about the policy, not just the preference for boys, but there were other things too. Find them and write them down. And finally, what were the benefits of just having one child? So it's not quite the benefits of last lesson that you looked at, but the other benefits of just having the one child. Again, see if you can find a couple of statements. This task, to answer these 2 questions, is going to probably take you, because you're going to be writing out in detail, it's probably going to take you a good 15 minutes. So spend 15 minutes on it. It's 5 minutes per question. And you've got to find the statements, remember, and then you've got to write them down. And remember, I am online right now in your live lesson. So if you have any questions about anything you read, words that you don't understand, please do ask me. Okay, so I'm hoping now that you've done that last task. Here is another photo. It's different to the image at the beginning, but again, I would go through the same process with you in the lesson as to guessing, describing what you can see and saying what you think it's about. And as you can see here, we've got a child strapped to a chair in what looks like an awful lot of clothing, badly fitting clothing, which is patched up a lot. The child doesn't look very happy. The child has marks on her face. There are some sharp wooden sticks next to her eyes, which doesn't look safe. She's also strapped to the chair, so she can't move. There's a bucket under the chair. We can assume that that's to collect any wee. Look at the room in the picture. The room has got a bare floor, uninteresting walls with paint that's peeling off, and it looks like there's another chair next to hers with another child that's also probably strapped into another chair. Now, this is another consequence of the policy, and you have written about it on the previous activity. This is Mei Ming. Mei Ming is in a Shanghai orphanage. Shanghai is a city in China, and she's in an orphanage where unwanted babies go. She's been sat this way for 10 days. She is tied up in urine-soaked blankets. So she's been wetting herself for the last 10 days, and nobody's done anything about it. Many of the children in this orphanage have scabs of dried mucus growing across their eyes. Their faces shrink into their skulls, malnutrition slowly shriveling their 2-year-old bodies. That means they're being fed, but they're being fed with the same thing all the time. So they've got no variety. So they might just be being fed with rice, just rice. Rice for breakfast, rice for lunch, rice for dinner, just rice all the time. So they're actually still starving because they're starving from all the other nutrients that they're not getting. The orphanage staff call this room the dying room. And basically they've abandoned her. They've abandoned her for the very same reasons her parents abandoned her shortly after she was born. She's a girl. That's why they abandoned her. Because remember, we said that there is a preference for boys. And if you have a baby and discover it's a girl, sometimes they are so disappointed that they will abandon the baby. They might even try and abandon it to pretend. They might even have run a long way away when they were pregnant, in the early stages of pregnancy, when nobody knew they were pregnant. They might have run away, a long way away, waited 9 months, had the baby, realised it was a girl, and just abandoned it. Literally left it on the side of the road. There are instances where babies like this have been found on rubbish dumps. It's very, very sad. And they've just left them. And then they've gone back home and pretended that they've never had a baby. And sometimes this happens so that they can try for another, see if they can actually have a boy. Mei Ming means no name. So this child is in an orphanage. She's not even got a name. So they call her Mei Ming. And that means no name. Imagine that. So again, on the previous activity, you wrote about girls being mistreated or girls being abandoned, and they end up in the orphanages. And this shows you what it's like in the orphanages. So unless these children are adopted, they may have a very unhappy life, or they may not even make it into adulthood. They may die. In the previous lesson, I was asked about whether children could be adopted. Yes, they can. But because the preference for boys is so strong, very few people would want to adopt a baby girl. They'd want to adopt a baby boy, but you just don't find baby boys in the orphanage, because if people have a baby boy, they are so overjoyed they would never put it up for adoption. So really, all the babies you find in the orphanages are girls. The only boys that you find in the orphanages are boys that are perhaps disabled, or they have a mental disability or a physical disability, which is very sad. Okay, the other negative, so that's looking at the orphanages. The other negative was little emperor syndrome. You read about little emperor syndrome. In other words, children being so badly spoiled that they turn into little brats, basically. And the little brats, that we would call them, they're called little emperors there. Emperors, a bit like we have kings and queens. An emperor is like your equivalent. So they call it the little emperor syndrome, which basically means that they're very spoiled children, which isn't a good thing. I want to finish on this. Did China have much choice? You know, look at that graph there. That graph is showing you population growth over time. And for the first 1,500 years, not a lot happened, did it? The population didn't really grow. It stayed the same. It increased a little bit when Song was in reign, and then went back down to when Yan was in reign. Those are the emperors at the time. And then at 1,500, it then started to shoot up. And look at it. Look at it in 1990. We've got 1,132 million people. I mean, that's an incredible number. And you can imagine what that graph was going to do. It would just keep going up and up and up and up and up. So what else could they have done? You know, they did the one-child policy because they were desperate to reduce the population. What else could they have done? You've also got to remember that people do now have a better standard of living than they did before. People are richer now. They've got more space. They're not struggling for resources. So actually, China has also avoided a population crisis, hasn't it? That would have occurred if they hadn't done something about it. And now it's been relaxed. Just recently, the last few years, they've relaxed the policy. So people can have more than one child now. They can have two. So yes, the policy was really harsh, but maybe it wasn't necessary. I've ended that as a question because there are other ways of trying to reduce populations. And this was a very harsh way of doing it, putting rules on people, and so on and so forth. And there were problems, as you can see from this policy. But there were also successes. So to finish today's lesson, I'd like you to do a news broadcast. And in your news broadcast, I'd like you to write about what they discovered, what's been discovered in China. So you could write about the dying orphanages, or you could write about Lu Chifin with the needles, or you could write about both. I want you to write about why the policy was considered necessary. So you might want to think back to last lesson as well. I want you to write down some of the problems that have come about because of the policy. So you might want to write about the baby girls. You might want to write about the emperor syndrome and other problems that this policy has caused. And finally, you might want to consider the fact that the policy has been successful to some extent. So that's your task to finish off, a nice newspaper broadcast. I know the lesson's been slightly morbid, slightly depressing, but, you know, these things happen in countries around the world and it's good to learn about these things. Like I say, there's been lots of changes recently and the policy has been relaxed and people are now being able to have more than one child again. I hope you've enjoyed learning about it. Cheerio.